Guide dogs are heroic dogs every day of their lives. Every time a squirrel runs in front of their noses and they don't chase it. But Floyd went one step further. Glenn was boarding with his mother at the time. One night she was awakened by Floyd grabbing and tugging at her arm. She got up and he pulled her down to Glenn's bedroom. Glenn was lying on the floor, unconscious and bleeding. She rushed to call 911. The paramedics and ambulance officers were there within minutes. Glenn was healthy and active and had never shown any signs of epilepsy. But that night, with no warning, his body began to shake violently. As the seizure went on, he fell out of the bed and hit his head. When the paramedics started working on Glenn, his mother tried to coax Floyd away, but the dog would have none of it. He broke away from her and returned to the bedside. Uneasy and more than a little scared, the paramedics let the dog stay only when they realized Glenn was blind and this was his guide dog. And over the next few days, while Glenn was recovering, Floyd rarely left his room. Glenn had a concussion and was out of school for a few weeks. The epilepsy was brought under control, but the seizure left him with a kind of amnesia. He was a month into the semester at the university, but he had no memory at all of having attended classes. He went through the notes he had taped and then transcribed into Braille and couldn't remember ever taking them. Glenn had to drop half of his courses and work on relearning everything he'd forgotten. He would not have had the courage to go back to school if it had not been for Floyd. In fact, I couldn't have done it without Floyd, he says. The walk to the bus, the long bus ride, and then getting around the campus, I would never have been able to do it if I had to use a cane. During this difficult time, Floyd was not only Glenn's eyes, but his memory. There was always the fear of having another seizure in the street, too, but Glenn knew that he was safe with Floyd. The dog would never leave him. I really sometimes wonder what would have happened to me that night if Floyd hadn't gotten my mom up, Glenn says. People sometimes die during seizures. Floyd just sort of stuck with me and never left my side. He's a great dog. Floyd is retired now, and Glenn has a new dog, a Labrador retriever named Rusty. Floyd has fitted in beautifully with his new family, Dave and Audrey McDonald, and their teenage daughters, Lindsay and Holly. They couldn't love him more or be more proud of him. He has learned to relax and enjoy life. It's not unusual to see him lying in the sun on the front lawn with the children all over him. His guide dog days are over, and he's enjoying a well-earned rest, but he still walks Audrey carefully around puddles. The next dog is Samantha, the motherly dog. There was a dog at the stable where Elena Tinsey rode. The dog was a German Shepherd, possibly mixed with a bit of a husky. The people who ran the stable had found her. She was either lost or abandoned. Although she was friendly, they didn't really want the timid, cowering dog around. Elena's coach was on the point of taking the dog to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the SPCA shelter, but Elena was determined to find a home for her. Unable to take the dog herself, she asked some friends, Brian and Michelle Holmes, if they would take the dog in. "Oh, sure," said Michelle. "We'll take another dog." They named her Samantha. The Holmes already had a dog, Monty, a mixed breed pup. At first, Samantha seemed determined to lose him. She would lead Monty off on long explorations and happily return home without him. Brian Holmes had many a call to go and fetch him back. But around the time Monty figured out how to find his own way home, Samantha's mothering instincts kicked in. She became very protective of him, and the two dogs are always together now. When the Holmes family dog sits a friend's Yorkshire Terrier and Lhasa Apso, Samantha is in her glory, looking after the two small dogs. She found Whoopsie, the Yorkshire Terrier, once when she was lost in the woods. Mind you, says Brian, I think at first Samantha thought Whoopie was a squirrel. She is even gentle with Brian's chickens and ducks. Samantha is especially fond of children. When Brian takes her along on his truck into town and she sees children playing at recess in a schoolyard, she goes wild, wanting to get out and play with them. Any child who comes to visit is welcome and well licked, and the four Holmes grandchildren are special favorites. One day, Brian was home alone, working on his computer. Monty was in the house with him. Brian heard Monty barking and went to the door to see if anyone had driven up. What he saw was Samantha with a little child hanging on her, his arms wrapped around her neck. When Samantha saw Brian, she stopped, turned around, and started to lick the child. Brian grabbed his coat. It was February, the snow was deep, and the temperature was hovering around 10 degrees Celsius below zero, with a wicked wind. The child was dressed only in a light jacket, unbuttoned, and with no hat. He had mittens, but they were hanging on strings beside his bare hands. He wasn't crying, but he was shaking with cold. Brian looked around. There was nobody else there. He tried to find out the boy's name, but couldn't make out what he was saying. Again, he looked around, trying to see if there was an adult anywhere near. He even ran quickly down his own driveway, thinking that because it was so icy, a car might have slid into a ditch. The only car he found was a little yellow battery-operated car, a child's ride-on toy, abandoned out on the snowy road. Brian picked it up and put it in his driveway where it could be seen from the road, then hurried to get the boy inside the house. Once inside, he took the boy's jacket off and started rubbing his hands. The child accepted Brian's help trustingly and soon began to warm up. The cookie Brian gave him helped too. Brian kept asking questions. He thought the boy said his name was Ronald, then gradually made out that the boy was going to see Mommy and the new baby. Brian called the Ontario Provincial Police. By the time they arrived, a very worried father had also turned up. It seemed that 3-year-old Donald, that was actually his name, had woken early that morning and had decided to take his battery-operated car to the hospital where his mother and new baby sister were. He dressed himself as well as he could, even managed to get his boots on, and set out while his dad was still asleep. The little car's batteries died about a kilometer away from the home, right at Brian and Michelle's home's driveway. No one knows for certain what happened then, but Samantha, who was outside, found him. Donald must have grabbed onto her for a warmth and comfort, and she pulled him into the home to Brian. The OPP reported to Brian that the next day the child was suffering from hypothermia, a dangerous lowering of the body's inner temperature. The area around the Holmes house is fairly isolated, and if Samantha hadn't found Donald, he might well have died. The police were pleased to have a story with such a happy ending to report, and they sent out a press release. Reporters and camera crews were quick to arrive, and Samantha became famous. She was on CBS Radio Noon, on television, and in all the area papers. That spring, she was also selected to receive the Ontario SPCA Hero of the Year Award, and Donald's mother has promised to keep the motherly dog supplied with dog biscuits for the rest of her life.
Yum yum.
The end.